Welcome to History Hack. If you didn't know by now, we are the revolution. That means we're sharp, witty, lots of fun, but it also means that we're essentially the peasants in Les Mis huddled round a table in the corner of the bar with no money. If you enjoy the show, please do support us. We have a Patreon account by which you can donate a small monthly sum in appreciation of what you're hearing. Alternatively, we have Ko-fi, in which you can just do a one-off donation as a thank you if you particularly enjoy a certain episode. Either way, we massively appreciate all of your support. Hope you enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of History Hack. Alex and Lena weren't paying attention the other day, and I have stolen the keys to History Hack Tower podcast recording studio to bring something that I find really interesting into the recording booth. And for that, I've got Peter Johnson, who is a historian from Leicester. He specialises in railway history and has written extensively on the subject with such books as the Festiniog Railway, Welsh Highland Railways. But he's here today to talk to us about his new book, Rail by Mail. So, Peter, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Oh, no, thank you. Yes, pleased to be with you.
Yeah, it's good to speak to you. I must admit, I was thinking about this the other day when I was reading your book. I grew up in the countryside in the sort of 80s and 90s when there was not much else to do when you're 10 years old other than to look out the window. And I remember sitting there, I had a flashback of staring out the window, watching Royal Mail carriages go past at like 8 o'clock at night. And I remember being, as a kid, finding this really interesting. So when the title came up, I was like, yeah, I've totally got to do this one. We'll start at the beginning. The post office was quite innovative in getting post out. And with the advent of the railway, it provides an amazing opportunity. But how do we get the two services coming together?
Well, there were some parts of the post office that were quite reactionary, and they weren't interested in making the change at all. But there was a man called Freeling, who was a baronet, and he was very keen in innovation, and he supported the introduction of the penny black as well. And he supported the use of railways. And so when the Liverpool and Manchester Railway was opened, which was the first intercity railway, he sent a man up to Manchester to see what it was all about and to see how they could make use of it. And it all grew out from there. When the Liverpool, Birmingham and London Railway opened, then the post office was using that right from the first day it opened. And they got a through route then from London to Manchester and Liverpool, which was sort of taking 6 hours or so to get the mail from one end to the other, whereas previously it would have taken a day or a day and a half to go by road.
Absolutely. The scope for communication is just immense when you're able to cut that kind of time off. But as railway mania takes hold, how does the rail post distribution system evolve?
As the railways opened, then there started to be a demand from the public for the mail service to be transferred to rail as soon as possible. Whereas there was a tendency by some in the post office to want to hold off and not to move so quickly. But the public was forcing the demand in the end. And it became commonplace that a new section of railway was open and the post had transferred to it straight away.
So I was talking to a friend last night about this. We in the pub, and we were saying about Beeching's Cuts, which we've done an episode of recently as well. A lot of the smaller villages like Goudhurst and Hawkhurst in Kent, where I grew up, they had their own branch line. Would the mail have gone up the branch lines, or was there like a central place where the mail would be pulled together and then distributed later?
Well, mostly it would have gone to the larger towns and probably some smaller towns as well. Some of the longer branch lines did get a service, but mainly it was for the main lines. I mean, the Royal Mail was the first big national distribution service. It was a forerunner of the trunk service that you see on the motorways today.
Yeah.
And they really had an integrated network as far as they could.
There's also this sort of enduring image of the Royal Mail, sort of in the 18th century, of post carriages thundering up the roads, but often being held up by highwaymen. And was there any you would have think that trains were a bit safer? Were there any incidences of crime on the post trains?
There was problems with crime. Some of it was opportunistic, with people, there'd be a train on the station with the door open and somebody on the platform seeing something that looked interesting and just helping themselves. Others was a bit more organised. There were several cases of employees stealing the registered letters that had got money in them. Then, of course, the most famous case was what they call the Great Train Robbery.
Yeah.
And that was the culmination of a group of people who'd been actually robbing trains for several years, mainly in London and the southeast of the country. But they got together this plan, which I think everybody's heard about, to stop the main line, main train from Scotland to London, which at the time they were carrying old banknotes back to the Bank of England to be scrapped because they were being replaced. So they knew that there's going to be a lot of money on this train, and the record is that they succeeded in getting away with about £6 million, and most of it was never recovered.
Yeah.
So that is the most notorious one. And of course, it forced the post office to put more security into the trains, because their attitude up to them, well, we've never had any problems, why do we need to do anything? Well, of course, the train robbery showed them why they should do something.
Absolutely. So whenever there's a disaster, there's always after the fact of, oh yeah, probably we should have been doing this in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there've been minor cases before where they taken no notice of. They've done nothing about it.
Was one of them?
I'm sorry?
Okay, so the other thing when I always wanted when I was a kid growing up was a train set, but I could never afford it. But my friend had one, and he had the postal one.
Yeah.
And it even had a little model apparatus, so that as the Hornby train went by, it dropped the little mailbag into the carriage. I remember sitting staring at that for hours. Just a circular track.
Yeah,
so
I've got
did have this.
Yeah, I've got 2 or 3 of those upstairs. But the Royal Mail British apparatus became quite sophisticated and was designed to put the mail off the trains at places where, if they stopped, it would probably take they'd lose 10 to 15 minutes in the journey by stopping the train to drop the mail off and pick up new mail. By using this apparatus, they can make the trains much faster. And they had posts by the line side, which they could hang bags of mail on. And they had big sacks, troughs of netting, where they could pick up the mail off the trains. And they did spend a lot of time over the years in fine-tuning this system. And it lasted until the 1970s. And one of the reasons it came to an end was that the trains were getting faster. This was with the electrification between London and Glasgow. And the trains were getting faster. And to be exchanging the mail at this speed, it was actually getting quite unsafe. So that they stopped doing it. But you can still go to the Great Central Railway in Leicestershire, and several times a year they put on demonstrations to see the exchange of mail from the train to the line side and vice versa.
Oh wow! Yeah, I'll have to come up and have a look for that. My son would love that. Before the electrification and it got too fast, was it how successful was it? Was it? I can hear in the back of my head health and safety. was it particularly dangerous before that?
Yeah, well, I mean, an old postman who was, well, I'm going to say he was an Irishman. So, I mean, some Irishmen are known for telling you stories, but he said to me that it was all right up to about 60 miles an hour. But after 60 miles an hour, you kept well out of the way of it. Because you get these bags of mail that were coming into the trains were 40 or 50 pounds in weight. So you can imagine getting thwacked with one of those at 70 miles an hour would be quite painful.
Oh, gosh,
And
yes,
you'd probably have to spend a few weeks in hospital because of it.
Yeah, I used to haul mail I worked in the IWM post room a long time ago, and some of the sacks of mail that would come in, I don't think they reached that weight, but I really wouldn't want to be hit by one of those at 60 miles an hour. It's quite a solid.
The things for the apparatus on the trains. I mean, they put several bags of mail inside what they called a pouch, which is made of leather. So you can imagine it was very strong and to protect the mail. So it was quite a hefty item to come flying through the door. And there were cases where the mail coming in the opposite direction. This was hung out on the line side standard, and there were cases of people having their heads out at the window of the train and being injured. And in one case, a woman was killed when she hit her head on the bag hanging off the apparatus. So it was quite dangerous.
Oh wow! That immediately makes me think back to the Quentin Blake. We had at school. We got the Quentin Blake illustrated railway safety thing book, and there was "Don't put your head out of the window of the train" and the person's head coming off. But I don't think it didn't say anything about watch out for flying mail bags.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point. And of course, there are some line-side features which are closer to the train than perhaps it wouldn't be allowed nowadays. I mean, it would never get through the safety case.
Gosh, no.
Mechanism. You know, I mean, it was something that was invented in the 1830s and 1840s when they didn't assess things in the way that they would do nowadays.
And just like the train robbery, it's all fine until something goes wrong.
Yeah. And then it's the old attitude, oh, well, it's never happened before. But it doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
The other thing is, did they have any specialized rolling stock? And if so, how did it change over time as the duties changed?
Well, yes, they did have special carriages. The first ones, which were experimental, were four-wheeled horse boxes, which were converted to give the postman, the post office, the facilities to both stow the mail in bags, but also to sort it in transit. And these became quite sophisticated. I mean, they went up from 4 wheels to 6 wheels, and they were making them especially for the post office. There were quite detailed contracts for this. And then they went on to bogie carriages, like the modern carriages.
Yeah.
And there were trains, the up special and the down special, which went from London to Aberdeen and back. They were 10 or a dozen carriages full of postmen sorting mail in transit. So they'll be picking up mail, well, they start from London and have mail in London, and they'll be putting it off in on route. I'm trying to think now where they'll be doing it. Rugby was one place, and then they go to sort of, there are express trains, and the post office were quite strict about, or became quite strict about not having trains with passengers on as well, because if trains had to stop for passengers, then it invariably meant they lost time, which meant their schedule, delivery schedule, went up the Swanee, to use a phrase. One of the things that the public became very concerned about and determined to have very early on in the 19th century was that they liked the idea, so if they were in Edinburgh or Glasgow, they could get a letter delivered during the morning, say at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning, and they wanted the facility to be able to reply to that letter and to get it in the post the same day so that it would be delivered back to its sender the original sender in London, say, the following day. Now, this is quite forceful on the part of the public and quite imaginative, really. And when you consider this was starting in the 19th century, and they've been used to the mail taking sort of several days to get through. And they were saying, well, you can do it the next day. We want it the next day.
Yeah. Yeah, it is quite as I said, quite a swap around from, we could have correspondence over the course of about 4 days, or you could have it tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean it's like ordering stuff off Amazon. I mean, before that, you'd ring somebody up, you'd wait on a line. You're the 10th in the queue to be answered. You'd place your order, and it had arrived the following week. Now you can go online and press a button, and it turns up the next day.
Yeah, or if you pay for the extras, if you're really lucky, you can get it same day delivery. Which
I've had same day delivery. Yes.
Terrifying.
Yeah, I mean it's amazing. It's amazing how things have changed.
My daughter was telling me the other when we were talking about the way things are now, and I said, just 20 years ago when I was your age, and she said, "My word, Dad, you make the 90s sound like the Dark Ages." And it's not that bad.
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly amazed. I mean, I'm a bit older now, but the things that have changed since even I was a lad. I mean, my parents, when they first had a telephone, had a shared line, and they had to wait several months before they could even get the shared line. And now, I mean, if you want a telephone, you go into town, you walk into a phone shop and you buy a phone, and you walk out with a working phone. You don't have to wait for somebody to come round and do it. No, it's quite amazing the contrast in the technology that's available to people, and the rapid development that's taken place over the last 20 years.
Yeah, it's been quite amazing. But talking of rapid development and stuff, transporting post across London has its own issues with the roads. I mean, anyone that's driving around London or sitting on a bus going around London. But the post office come up with a new idea, don't they? They develop an underground railway and also the pneumatic tube system.
Yeah, I mean, even when the road traffic was horse-drawn, I mean, London was known for its traffic jams, and I think they were doing about 6 miles an hour, and it's not a lot different now. The first thing that happened with regard to the post office was a private company came up with the idea of running a pneumatic tube underground to carry the post and to carry parcels and other goods as well, because this was sort of electric systems hadn't been fully developed at the time, but they could do pneumatics, and they built a tube line between Euston in London and the North District Post Office, which was about 3/4 of a mile away. And that turned out to be quite successful. So they thought, well, this is working, so we'll go to build another tube from Euston and go through the centre of London, go to the London chief office of the post office, which is near St Paul's Cathedral. And they started to build this second tunnel, but they had problems financing it. And the post office got fed up with them and said even if they finished it, they wouldn't use it. So it was eventually abandoned. But as electric systems became more advanced, then the post office came up with its own idea of running an underground railway from Paddington to the Eastern Central District Office, which is just a little bit further east than Liverpool Street in London. And this was a 2-foot gauge electric railway. It was fully automated, which was the first automated railway in the world.
Yeah.
Didn't need staff. or rather, it needed staff to run it, but it didn't need drivers and guards. So that was a benefit, and it meant it wasn't affected by the traffic. And it served all the central London sorting offices. So they started building it in before the First World War, and they built most of the tunnels before the First World War started. And of course, the war came. Some of the tunnels were used for air raid shelters for the public. And then after the war, it took the government a while to raise the money to finish the project, which meant it wasn't finished until 1928. But it was quite successful. It ran until the early, about 20 years ago. Part of it is now opened as Merseyrail tourist attraction at Mount Pleasant in London, where you can go and actually ride on it. Where, of course, in the old days, with the when it was run for carrying mail, then people couldn't ride on it. But this was quite an innovation. There were one or two other places overseas. There's one in Canada, I think, and one in Germany where they did a similar thing. But the post office one, again, it was integrated. It was part of the network. So, but this was overtaken by development of email, and the number of volume of letters started to fall, and so there wasn't as much work for the Underground Railway, so it couldn't justify itself. And again, there's probably a bit of investment was needed. Ideally, they could have extended it to the new road sorting office at Willesden, but they couldn't justify the expenditure on it, which is, from a railway point of view, is quite unfortunate. And there was a suggestion that they could sell the tunnels and use it for delivering parcels, but of course the people who wanted parcels delivering didn't want to go where the post office wanted to go. Yeah. So it wasn't very much use to that. So most of it is now mothballed, apart from the short section, as I say, at Mount Pleasant, where people can go and visit it and have a short ride underground, which is quite interesting. I've done that. It's quite pleasant. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of those things. When I was working in London, I kept meaning to go and do. A friend of mine went on it, and he said it was fantastic. But I really must find time to go and do it. And got round to it.
The other tour that they do the little train where you can go and ride underground, but also they run walking tours, so you can actually walk through the tunnels and see it from the ground, which of course it takes a lot longer than going around on the train, so it gives you better more time to understand the nature of the construction and how they built it and what was there. And of course the staff who escort you give you stories and tell you about what it was like underground for the postman who worked on it as well.
All right, yeah, I'll definitely have to try and make my way up there at some point.
Yeah, I can recommend both of them.
Might drag my son along. He'd be really into that. Moving on, though, tell us about what the Shrewsbury crash of 1907.
Shrewsbury Railway approach from Crewe is on quite a sharp curve, and there's a speed restriction to approach Shrewsbury Station. And in 1907, one night, the train was approaching, and for reasons, of course, nobody ever has properly found out why, the driver didn't brake the train, didn't apply the brakes, and so the train derailed. And this was one of the mail trains, and there were several postmen who were killed. At that time, in 1905 to 1907, there were 3 or 4 or 5, I think, of these high-speed derailments under similar circumstances. Grantham was another one, Salisbury was another one, where whether the driver just lost his concentration, nobody knows, because obviously the driver and the fireman were killed. But it's quite a shocking thing. at the time. I mean, there were, and of course there were passengers killed as well. They got passengers on the train. I mean, the Shrewsbury one's in my book because of the postmen who were killed. The others were quite significant incidents in their own right as railway accidents.
Yeah, I've got an inkling there was a crash in Marden in Kent, and it had something to do with the post train, but it's a distant memory. I can't remember the details of it. Think there might have been a passenger train and a freight train. I might be forget. It's been a long time since I've read about it.
Yeah, I can't bring to mind at the moment. No, but yeah, I mean, Hither Green was one that you might have heard of, but that wasn't a mail train. That was a passenger train, where they think that the locomotive in that case overbalanced, and there was a problem with the locos, not just with the track or the driving.
Yeah, the other one that bounces to mind was Charles. Again, it's passenger train, so I know it's off topic, but there was the one outside Staplehurst, which Charles Dickens was on. The engine ended up in the River Buell.
Yeah, I mean, I think that affected him as well. He wrote about it, having been on this accident. I mean, he was very lucky not to have been seriously injured.
Yeah, it could have been a lot. From memory, that someone was doing rail works, but no one had told the drivers. And but again, distant memory. I need to read up on them again. But how did nationalisation of British Rail affect the mail service though? Because before you had all the individual companies like the Chatham and Dover lines and stuff. When it all becomes British Rail, how did that affect them?
Well, with British Rail, there was obviously just one company providing the service to the post office. What it did mean was the carriages which had been introduced by the predecessors, the Great Western, the Southern, the LNER, and the Great LMS. Some of those were quite modern, but others were quite old, so they started to be replaced. And British Rail introduced a standard design, which could go anywhere in the country. Because some of the older ones could only go on particular routes, which obviously limited their use, because they'd been commissioned by the post office to work on particular routes. So with British Rail, and they obviously used more modern techniques as well. They started in the 1950s and carried on till the 1970s, building new post office carriages.
Yeah, and I know I've mentioned them before, but did the Beechings cuts have that much of an effect on the service as well?
Well, it affected some of the routes that were available. But I mean the main lines obviously continued, and they weren't affected by Beeching at all. It was the feed-in routes that were affected. But so there was still a viable network for the post office. It did shrink over the years, and they used to review the service and make changes to it probably every 3 or 4 years or so, depending on the changes. They introduced a measure of using airmail on some services because the East Midlands Airport, not far from me, at Castle Donington, was a place where the mail would come by train to Derby and be taken by road from Derby to East Midlands Airport, and then put on an aeroplane and flown to Newcastle or to Scotland, because they could do it much faster doing it that way. So they were still looking at innovation all the way through the history of this service.
Yeah, the sad thing is though that by 2004 that the service is finally withdrawn. Well, I know we've touched on it already, but was it what were the sort of causes for this? Was it just like the advent of email?
Well, yes. I mean, a number of things. The advent of email, as you say, reduced the volume of letters being carried. The another issue which wasn't touched on when in 2004 was actually the carriages were getting worn out and needed to be replaced, and they weren't. Some people at the Royal Mail weren't sure that they'd be able to make a safety case for running carriages like that, how they could demonstrate that they were safe for people to be standing up whilst the train's travelling at speeds of up to, say, 80 or 90 miles an hour. They didn't really think they could do it. And then it came to the question of investment and whether they could justify the investment. So there are other issues going on as well. The company that provided the haulage service for the Royal Mail had the impression that Royal Mail would pay anything for the service and kept putting up its prices, apparently, whereas Royal Mail was actually quite price sensitive because it was in a competitive market. There were other people wanted to enter. And so it would have been difficult for them to have carried on anyway because the carriages were wearing out and probably couldn't be replaced. But there was a dispute over the cost of the service as well, and the fact that the road network had become stable, and the technique of putting distribution centres next to motorway junctions and being very, very convenient and reliable. Obviously took over as the bulk mail carriage option of choice, you might say.
Absolutely. Although I'm going to get in a private whinge at the moment. This is only really applicable to me. My mother posted my birthday. It was my birthday on Friday. My mother posted a card from Newark in Nottinghamshire on Sunday, second class. We're now a week on, still no birthday card. So Royal Mail.
Yeah, but I mean, you can tell stories like that, and obviously with justification. But equally, I've had stuff sent to me one day and it's arrived the next day. And
yeah, likewise. I posted my nephew's card. He lives in Newark as well, and it arrived literally the next day. So I'm just a bit bitter. My mum phoning me up and asking if my cards arrived.
I think it depends on the part of the country you are. I think just where the routing is, and on the nature of the staff in the locality. It's like when you talk about your delivery, your internet delivery van service, and some people will call one company or another. I'm not going to name any now, but it actually depends on the man or woman on the day, and some of them are extremely reliable and trustworthy, and others are not reliable.
Absolutely. Like my fish tank that I ordered that was pitched over the garden fence. I came home to a box of broken glass. And then, as you said, others are really good. So, yeah, it's one of those things.
It varies according to the people who are doing it. So you can't point the finger at one or the other, I don't think.
But Peter, this has been fantastic. It's been really interesting. Would you mind just reminding us the title of your book and where people can get it from?
Okay, well, the book is Mail by Rail, the story of the post office and the railways. You can get it from well-known internet suppliers. You can get it from bookshops. Some bookshops will have it in stock. Some will get it to you for order, and but it's and the publisher. We should say the publisher, I think, and that's Pen and Sword, and they've got a website, and you can buy it from them as well. So there's lots of choice for buying it, and different prices. I shouldn't tell you that. I should only tell you the full price because I get most money out of that. But you can get it at different prices as well.
Absolutely, and I will speak to the powers that be. We have our own History Hack bookshop, online bookshop. I will speak to the powers if we could get it in. Then that way, you get more money, we get some more money. It goes into an independent booksellers, and Jeff Bezos can't use it for spaceship money, which is
that's how it should work, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I mean that's a brilliant idea. if you've got a shop, you should stock it. It is selling well. I went to a model row exhibition at the NEC on Saturday, where my publisher had got a stall, and he sold 6 copies on Saturday.
Wow.
And which is quite good. So I think he was going to disappoint people on Sunday, on the second day of the exhibition. But yeah, I think people are people are buying it. So hopefully some listeners will go out and buy it as well.
Absolutely.
At least
And,
find out about it and see what it's about. And because people are so far, I'll tell you what, there's some very good reviews about it. So,
yeah.
People who have read it, I've enjoyed it. So.
And I count myself as one of them. I read it for the prep for this episode, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm giving it my seal of approval for what that's worth to our listeners. So definitely go out and get this book. It's definitely worth the read.
Thank you. Yeah, well, it's been good. It's been a bit of fun to chat about it as well.
Absolutely, and thanks for coming on.
Our incredible guests give us 45 minutes of their time to join us and talk about their work or their new book. This is just a small taster. As a result, we have launched our very own bookshop on bookshop.org, where you can find our guests' latest books, you can support them, and you can support us on History Hack. 10% of every sale via our bookshop supports the podcast and allows us to keep going and bring you more top-of-the-line guests. You can find our bookshop at bookshop.org/shop/History Hack, or search for us in the shop section. Thank you so much for your continued support. We really appreciate our listeners and supporters. So make sure you get down to the bookshop and grab yourselves a new book.